When my friend and I, let's call him T, were teenagers, we used to hang out a lot at a park a few miles away from our home. The park was a semi-clean, semi-safe park in an urban neighborhood behind our old middle school. And seldom did we run into trouble, except maybe a scrap or two with a couple scumbag local kids. T and I never went looking for trouble, just to hang out, ride bikes, smoke weed, occasionally fish at the nearby river, sometimes just hike in the woods behind the park and talk, and other typical teenager stuff. The park is fairly decent sized, and if you go back far enough, near the woods and creek, you'll find an old set of railroad tracks, used seldom nowadays. Taking these tracks northwest would lead you deeper into the city of Buffalo, where we rarely went, while taking the tracks east or southeast would lead you out of the park across an old bridge, called Black Bridge by the locals, that went across the river over a street called Mineral Springs Road. And if you went far enough down the tracks, you'd end up in a more suburban town called West Seneca. T and I never took the tracks that far, but we would occasionally cross Black Bridge, and one time, in the summer of 2014, when we were about 15 or 16, we had walked about 10 or 20 minutes past the bridge, over the road, and eventually came to a large patch of woods on our right with a path going in, looking fairly overgrown. Feeling adventurous, we decided to go in and have a look around. While we were in there, we made an unnerving discovery. We walked down the path and took a right when it split. The path didn't go far until it became so overgrown there basically wasn't even a path there anymore, and going deep enough back looked like it led to some old houses. As we turned around and were about to leave, I had looked to the left and saw something on the steep hill that led up to the tracks, away from the original path. It was a tunnel, a drainage tunnel to be exact, or at least that's what we thought it was. T and I walked up to it to get a bit closer. The tunnel was just big enough to crouch into, and we couldn't see any lights on the other side. It just led into the seemingly unending darkness. There was some graffiti on the walls, a few rocks on the ground, and a wet, dirty line that had once been a stream that had dried up. It smelled dank, looked claustrophobic, and gave both of us a bad vibe. We had no idea how deep this tunnel went, or where it went, and neither of us had the balls to go in more than 10 feet to find out. What made it even creepier to us was the graffiti surrounding the tunnel and the stone frame around it. Someone had spray painted a large, black eye on top of the frame, with various blue arrows pointing up towards it on the sides. Because of this, T and I nicknamed this tunnel the Eye Tunnel. During our walks in the coming months, T and I would occasionally come back to this area and check the tunnel again. T would take pictures of it and the graffiti around it, but I didn't have a good phone back then. We would often dare ourselves to see who was brave enough to go in the farthest, but again, neither of us went in more than 10 feet or so. T always got some really bad vibes from the place, and said he could feel something ominous when near it. He told me he could feel that there was something bad, perhaps even unnatural, on the other side, or that something bad had happened inside there at some point in its history. Well, I didn't exactly find the place welcoming either. I thought T was being melodramatic and irrational. I wasn't one to believe in superstitions or anything paranormal or anything like that, but T's fear of the place eventually escalated into an almost panicked response from him the more we went there. Eventually, T told me he didn't want to go back there anymore, that he was having nightmares about it and felt like there was really something wrong with not only the tunnel, but the entire area, and he could never quite put his finger on what it was. He thought the tunnel was haunted or something. I, again, thought he was being melodramatic, but if he really was that uncomfortable around the tunnel, I obliged and said we wouldn't go back there anymore. For a while, he didn't even want to go back to the park anymore, because he hated being reminded of the Eye Tunnel. We continued hanging out at the park for about another year or so until T got into a fight with some of the other kids there. and we ultimately decided to no longer go there because we didn't want to run into them anymore. Since then, the park has apparently gone downhill even farther. Drug deals, gang activity, fights, vandalism, and arson became quite prevalent there. Broken glass and needles were frequently found on the playgrounds, and even a few shootings, as well as a woman being assaulted in the woods. Basically, it turned into your typical shitty ghetto park. T and I were glad we stopped hanging out there when we did. Besides, we found better things to do with our time, such as fishing and riding bikes in other better areas, and just hanging out at our houses. We both got cars as well, and started going out to even farther places. Essentially, we had forgotten about that park, and we had forgotten about the eye tunnel for a few years. Nowadays, we are both 20, so it's been about 3 or 4 years since we've even been back at that park. We graduated high school. T moved on to trade school and I went on to college, living at home still. T and I still hang out, but we've been too busy to do anything lately. Just about a week ago, I was taking a walk down the nearby Mineral Springs and found out that there was a path to get up to the railroad tracks on the bridge over the streets, past Black Bridge. Since it had been a couple years since the last time I visited the eye tunnel, I decided I might go see it again, but I wanted to take some good pictures of it. Since I'm taking a photography course in college and wouldn't mind adding some creepy images to my portfolio, that turned out to be a mistake I now regret with every fiber of my being. The next day, I had walked back to Mineral Springs with my digital camera, took the path up to the railroad tracks, and started my hike alone. I remembered exactly where I was going. After several minutes of walking down the tracks, into a more desolate area with only the distant sound of traffic and the wind in the trees making the atmosphere, I found the exact path into the woods T and I used to take. It was still overgrown, but it had looked like someone had been taking care of the foliage before it became too much to walk through. I went right in. After walking down the grassy path and taking the right we used to take, it wasn't hard for me to find the eye tunnel. It still looked exactly the same as it did the last time I saw it all those years ago, with the eye and arrows still there, not having faded at all from the elements, and still looking as ominous as ever. I snapped a picture of it. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go inside, after being too scared 2 years ago, and thinking about how T reacted to it made me nervous. What if there was a legitimate reason for him to be scared of it? What if the vibes he got were trying to tell him something? Nevertheless, I took a few deep breaths and crouched in. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever. I started trudging inside. It smelled dank, musty, and dirty, like a stagnant pond. After a few steps, I realized I had traversed farther than T or I ever had before, and turned around to see I had to be at least 20 feet from the entrance. I pulled out my flashlight and continued on. There was plenty of graffiti on the walls from past visitors, but the graffiti became less frequent the farther I went in. After about 20 feet or so, I snapped another picture. I continued walking down the tunnel. As I walked even farther, the uncomfortable feeling in my gut grew even worse. The graffiti on the walls became less like words and more like random collages of symbols and bizarre patterns. They looked even older than the other graffiti I saw. I continued farther and came to a part with little graffiti on the walls. My flashlight started flickering, which I assumed was the battery, so I snapped another picture with the flash on to lighten the place. Then turned around and was shocked to see that I had to be at least 100 feet from the entrance. I could barely see it anymore. I turned back around to look at my camera and saw something shocking. My camera's battery, despite having charged it at home, was on only one bar and then died. I was shocked. How was that even possible? I decided to pull out my phone and finish taking pictures with that, only to discover something even more mysterious. When I turned my phone on, all I saw were a variety of pink and gray lines running across my phone screen, like it had been broken or distorted. My nervousness quickly turned to panic. My initial thought was that something down here might be releasing energy, like an electromagnetic pulse, but had done damage to my equipment. There's no way this could have been a coincidence. This should have been my warning to get out of there immediately, but something drew me in farther, and I felt like I needed to explore more. Regardless of what I found down there, I foolishly continued on. My flashlight wasn't flickering anymore, and as I shined it down the tunnel even farther, taking one step at a time, a different smell began to slowly overpower the dank, musty smelling one I had smelled before. I didn't recognize it at first, but it smelled rancid. A few more steps in and it hit me. I was smelling decay, something rotting, festering down here for who knows how long. I wasn't sure if I was going to stumble across a dead body or something, but I felt like I had to find out. I continued on. Eventually I saw another piece of graffiti on the wall. It was of some kind of red stick figure, although it had different shaped limbs on it. I found it rather difficult to describe, but it looked like its limbs had multiple joints on it that bent in different directions. Its face had some details on it, but it didn't look like normal facial features, just a collection of random dots and lines. It also looked incredibly old and faded. Older than any of the other graffiti I had seen down there. I wish I could have gotten a picture of it. The way it looked reminded me of an old cave dwelling, and I wondered just how old this entire tunnel system even was. Something about it made me uncomfortable just looking at it. I continued on. The stench of decay was overbearing now. I was starting to get nauseous. Suddenly, my flashlight starts flickering again. I feel like I'm ready to have a heart attack from the building tension. I was more scared than I had ever been. What if T did have a legitimate reason to be scared of this place? I was almost ready to turn around and run when I started hearing something deep within the tunnel. I couldn't even tell what it was at first, and I almost thought it was in my head. Then I could make it out. It was the mumbling, moaning and whispering of many different voices. I was frozen dead in my tracks. My flashlight stopped flickering. Then, in front of me, I saw something moving. There were multiple things, and at first they looked almost transparent. Then they came closer and I could see what they were. Faces. Faces that looked nothing like I had ever seen on a person. They were distorted and misshapen. They flashed down the tunnel and disappeared and reappeared over and over again. A few times I thought I saw a regular human face, but it flashed so quickly I couldn't make out the details. The voices grew louder, in a language that sounded nothing like any language I had ever heard before. Something that didn't sound like it could come from any language spoken by humans. The voice didn't even sound human. They sounded alien, ancient, primal, like some type of demon. Suddenly, my flight instinct finally kicked in, and I broke my stance. I felt like I needed to get out of there now. I wasted no time. I turned around and hauled it as fast as I could the way I came. I couldn't even see the entrance at first, but it eventually came into view as a tiny light at the end of the tunnel. The voices behind me evolved into screams and shrieks, which sounded nothing like I had ever heard any human or animal make before. It was bone-chilling, otherworldly, and something I couldn't get away from faster. I now knew there was definitely a reason T got bad vibes from this place. There was something down here that was definitely not natural. Something that wasn't from our world. Something that should have been forgotten about. That nobody should have ever stumbled across. Despite the sensory overload, I ran faster than I had ever run before. I didn't stop to look at anything on the walls, and I didn't count my steps. And I definitely wasn't about to look behind me. I kept running, watching the light at the end of the tunnel get closer and closer. Once I was within 50 feet of the entrance, the sounds and shrieks subsided. I didn't care. I ran and burst into the fresh air and sunlight like a bat out of hell. I ran as fast as I could down the path and out of the woods. I ran down the railroad tracks as fast as I could until I got to the path to the street. I don't even know how long it was to get out. I only remember running, with nothing but terror on my mind. The street had some cars driving by and some people. I finally stopped to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. I felt like I had come to the gates of some kind of new dimension, and something on the other side was trying to pull me in. I had so many questions. What did it all mean? What did I see? What was I hearing? I felt like I had stumbled on something that no human was meant to see. Did the eye at the entrance and tunnel represent something? Was it really a gateway to another world? Was this something I would recover from? My mind raced. I was in a deeper state of shock than I had ever been. I don't even remember walking home that day, but I know I didn't stop thinking about what I had just seen. I don't even remember much else about that day, other than the fact that I dwelled on what I saw in that tunnel for the rest of the night. I didn't tell anyone about my experience, and I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. It's been a week since my experience in the tunnel, and it hasn't left my mind even once. The few times I have gotten any sleep since the incident were plagued with nightmares. Hallucinations of those screams, those unnatural whispers and moans, those transcendent faces, all still flashing in my memory. No, this was definitely something I would never recover from. My experience will haunt me until the day I die. I've been nervous to even leave my house since the incident. Despite the fact that the eye tunnel is a few miles away, I will never go back to that place in my life. What if something in that tunnel stuck with me since I left? At night, I swear I can still hear the voices, the unknown whispers coming from outside my bedroom window. But when I look outside, I can't find anything. Am I going insane? Did whatever was down in that tunnel screw with my brain? Sometimes, right before I fall asleep, I can see those distorted, human faces flashing in my memory and making me jump out of my bed startled. Is something wrong with me? My camera and phone started working again shortly after leaving, but every once in a while, my battery will drain to 1% and then turn off by itself, and my phone screen will occasionally distort and flicker in the same way it did in the tunnel until I restart it. Did whatever was down there do permanent damage to my electronics? Or maybe something from that tunnel followed me home and plans on sticking with me for the rest of my life? What if I awakened something in there that should have never been stirred? And what if it someday tries to drag me back to the tunnel, back to its world? What if it's something evil? What if it wants me dead? I'm too scared to talk to anyone in my life about the incident. Not that anyone except T would believe me, but I feel like I needed to at least let some people know about my experience in the eye tunnel, because I'm still feeling like there's been something wrong since I left. That's why I decided to write my story here. These are the coordinates to the wooded area where the eye tunnel is located, but I can't pinpoint the exact location of the tunnel. If you look at the map, you can follow the railroad tracks northeast and come to the bridge over Mineral Springs, where I got to the tracks at, as well as Black Bridge that goes over the Buffalo River. Here is the Google Street View location of the path I took up the hill to the railroad tracks. It's hard to see and fairly overgrown, but it was easy to get in when I entered. Once you get to the tracks, you would go right, across the bridge from Mineral Springs, and follow the tracks until you get to the path into the woods. I don't know how many of you live in the Buffalo area, or are willing to travel there just to get a look of the place, but I think it's worth warning anyone who might be interested in seeking out the eye tunnel for themselves. The eye tunnel is a very real place, and it should be kept away from at all costs. There are some things in this world that just aren't meant for us to see, some questions that are best left unanswered, and some places that are best left alone, and the eye tunnel is one of them. The eye tunnel is something otherworldly, something completely unnatural, and something absolutely foul. There is something in that tunnel, and I don't think anyone wants to know what it is. The eye represents something, whether it be a warning, a welcome, or some kind of rune. Whatever it is, it's possible that the eye tunnel that I found may not be the only one in the world, or the only place of serious paranormal significance. if you ever find a similar tunnel or a structure similar to the one I found, stay away from it at all costs. Curiosity killed the cat. Don't make the same mistake I made. Now I just hope that someday I can recover from my experience with that tunnel, and that whatever was in there stays in there.